Welcome back to Ask the Good Doctor. I'm Dr. LaJoyce Brookshire on Sirius XM Urban View, Channel 126, where talk empowers and becomes action. And I'd like to welcome back on this segment Dr. Shantella Sherman and Dr. Jonathan Matthias Lassiter. I didn't say his last name last time. Dr. Lassiter. And we are having a very informative conversation about the pandemic of racism. And you know what? There are a growing list of states that have been naming racism as a determinant of health and have added it as a declaration. California, Colorado, Connecticut, Georgia, Illinois, Indiana, Massachusetts, Maryland, Michigan, Minnesota, Missouri, Nevada, North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Texas, Vermont, Washington, and Wisconsin. Where are the rest of you?
Who's left?
That's right. Well, yes. Where are the rest of you? That's only half of you. The rest of you. It's important that it is noted that racism has been linked to higher levels of death in Black men from suicide and disease and homicide. And on average, Black youth face one major discriminatory experience each year. And not just Black youth, Black, brown, and yellow. They have stories to tell. I teach at City College, and they really wanted us to strike because of in solidarity with everything that's going on, but it's against the law in the state of New York. So instead of striking, they asked us to do a scholar strike. And in classes, we were to talk about police brutality and racism in our class. So my, we talked about their incidents of when they met a social injustice, and not only one of them said that he never met a social injustice, but he had many stories to tell about his parents, and he was from one of the Slavic countries.
Mm.
And what was interesting through those children, and I said what I was going to do about it, and I will read like a manifesto of how the children said they felt. It was riveting, college age students, what they had to say. And what was riveting was that the lighter skinned ones said they use their white privilege when they go march to protect their darker skinned brothers and sisters in the struggle. And I was like, what did you say? They say, yes, we actually stand in front of the darker skinned people so that they don't get hurt. And I thought, oh my goodness.
Mhm.
Talk about that, Doc Shan.
Well, again, that eugenics hits and it hurts and it stays. So, I want you to understand, and at some point during the month of October, I'll do another full-blown lecture. But when we start talking about race, it's always the extremes. So if whiteness is the epitome of good, the darker skinned the person is, they are the epitome of criminal, drug, lasciviousness, immorality, problems, anything that's going on. And so I've looked at police blotters and their educational tools from the 1800s moving forward. And what you would find is that they basically have to fit the description, dark, very dark, the darkest you can go. And there were certain other things where they would say sometimes because they knew that a lot of these white men had mixed race children, and not all of them came out light. Okay. So
That's
they
right.
would, right, be real clear on this. So the police would tell the person, they pull a Black person over and they tell them, pull down your lip, your bottom lip. They want to see the gradation. This is how ridiculous we were in this country. We've been the gradation of the inside of your lower lip. And if the darker it was purplish, that meant technically the rest of your skin is supposed to be dark, but it didn't transfer into your genes. Eugenics is about measurements. All right. It's about, and there are tools that I looked at where, we're talking about the space between your ears, the width of this, the circumference of that. 122 different parts of your body being measured. And this is every American in this country, whether they were born here or came in through Ellis Island, had to have measurements taken. They were usually done through the school system.
Yeah.
If they weren't done through the school system, they were done through a push for public health. Their public health institutions, the reason why they existed starting out was to get a good measurement and a good phenotype. All right. So some of these things they go into, again, policing bodies. One of the things that gets me with the movement that we're seeing right now, and I appreciate the number of white people that are out there in the streets, because I
Yeah.
said, most of the black folks at this point, they're still out there. They're yelling. They got it together. But these white folks are literally on the front lines in many
Yeah.
instances, and what I'm saying. And so it goes back to this thing. You won't harm me to the same degree that you will them. And so I can keep trying to push this envelope. Now, if they have other motives, I don't know, because I've heard that a number of times as well. I don't know. But I think that you have a different generation of white people. And again, I
Yeah.
think you can't put everyone, lump them all in one space. Again, one of the things that I find in the research, there was a slogan and it was a commercial. They used to come on in the 1970s. And it said, the only thing worse than a nigger, long pause, is a nigger lover.
I remember
Okay.
that.
Okay, so basically, you have as many white people under duress who are trying to do the right thing sometimes in communities as you do black people who are visually, you can see it's me. All right, and so
Too, even though I'm light.
right. I mean, LaJoyce, I've said on a number of occasions, if you ever decide to go into certain communities and you color their hair blonde, you could pass too, darling. All right. No, trust me. There's certain communities you just look like you've been to the beach, love. You've just been to the beach. It's okay.
I
Right,
don't
because
know.
I've seen the scales of gradation. Right, I've seen the scales, and it's like, yeah, you could do it if you chose, but that's what people
I'm
have to live
good.
with.
I'm good.
I'm sure.
But we see that though with these white women that are coming out now about passing as black women in these Africana studies departments.
Okay.
So that's part of it.
Are you trying to say there's more than one than Rachel Dolezal?
Yeah. Oh no, Jessica Krug and some doctoral student just came out. Yeah. So at least two in the past week. Yeah. Yeah. Masquerading as black women. For years, I think she has the associate professor, got tenure and everything in Africana Studies department.
All right. So speak to the reverse psychology of that, Doctor of Psychology.
Well, yeah, I think, speaking of psychology, I was thinking about when you Dr. Shane, you were talking about the white people who are trying to do the work. So there are some white people, and this is related to what you're talking about too, is that there's the psychosocial consequences of racism. And research has shown that white people actually feel both emotional, cognitive, and behavioral consequences. And so emotional consequences like guilt, cognitive consequences as not being able to believe that they can't think freely because they get trapped in this sort of group think sort of thing where other white people police their attitudes and their thoughts and their actions. And then there's the behavioral consequences where they cut themselves off from other members of society. And so then you have some people like the Jessica Krugs and the Rachel Dolezals who I do believe genuinely want to do something to push back against this racism, but are somehow conceptually incarcerated and get it twisted, and they assume the identities of the people that they say that they want to help. Inadvertently, or maybe intentionally, I don't know, right? Reifying or perpetuating the marginalization and the racism. So it's a very interesting psychology. It's a lot of mental machination and backflipping going on to justify that sort of behavior.
You know what? That is so frightening because here's the issue. Rachel must have had some kind of family feud in order for her family to out her. Do any of you all know
exactly
what happened there?
I don't know what happened there, but I do know that, they probably were pissed that their daughter is going around pretending to be black and basically disowning them, right? And so again, going back to what you were saying, Dr. Shane, is like, but we're white. How dare you disown us? For the jiggables?
No, let's not get that twisted.
Yeah.
Not just how dare you disown us, we're white. How dare you take on the persona of them people?
Yes, exactly.
how dare you do that to us? You're shaming the family.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I could
Yeah,
just imagine the conversation at that dinner table and how they sat around and devised the plan to out her as she sat in her presidential seat as the NAACP chapter president in Seattle.
But I
hey,
always say I don't really blame them for wanting to be Black because being Black is great.
exactly.
However,
Hey,
Oh,
however, you can't say that you want to help Black people and then turn around and take job. I mean, we're all inactive, right? We know that some of the few places that Black people can get jobs is in the Africana Studies Department. We got to scrape and scribe everywhere else. We got to,
right.
right? And so then you're going to be a white woman and go in Africana Studies of all
All
places.
places. Jeez, right. Right. Right.
that is hysterical. Well, you know what? As a result of racism and associated poverty and injustice, life expectancy at birth for Black men is far below white women, Black women, and white men. I found that to be a terribly astonishing statistic.
So when we talk about intersectionality, though, right, it makes sense because it's not only are Black men dealing with race, but they're also dealing with the gender piece. So racism affects us different based on our gender. So we know Black women have experienced racism in a particular way, but Black men experience it in a particular way as well that tends to be really brutal. Right, really brutal. And Black men are also physically brutal. I mean, and Black men are also dealing with the ways in which they internalize racism, in particularly gendered ways. So society is telling Black men that they don't count as men, and white society is telling Black men they don't count as men because they don't have access to the resources in the same way that capitalism gives white men. And so then they internalize that on some level, go about and try to prove their manhood in particular ways. And sometimes that can be by engaging in violent behaviors with each other, with their family members, so on and so forth. And so it's all connected. It all goes back to racism, trying to understand ways to navigate racism. And for some of us, we internalize that. And then we get anxiety, we're depressed, we get our PTSD. But some of us externalize it. And then who is most affected are the people around us who are closest to us. So we see that in both ways. And then again, that goes back to that lower life expectancy.
And so here's what's problematic. I mean, you can't even jog. You can't even actually apparently birdwatch these days without being at risk. But how crazy is that both of their last names were Cooper?
Oh.
What?
But you know,
go ahead.
sorry. But the other part to this though, again, when we start talking eugenically, manhood is defined and masculinity is defined in a very, very specific way. But that's defined for white men. And so a lot of the behaviors that kind of criminalize Black men and push them over in the corner are the very behaviors that define white masculinity. So when we talk about, we think the movies and things we watched as kids, or our parents watched, it's the cowboy films. Okay.
Yes.
You fight it out. You shoot it out. You're rough and tumble. Your masculinity is brawn. It's bravery. So it's like when you see Black men taking on these types of behaviors, it becomes they're violent. They're savage. They're animalistic. No, they're protecting their wives or their daughters or their kids or their community in the same way you have Liam Neeson, going across the Atlantic Ocean. All he heard, I want to, I can't express enough how pop culture now defines these things, this masculinity and all this. It defines it. So when you get a white man say on the phone in the preview, hey, listen, you done snatched my daughter from underneath that bed in Paris in a place where I don't even know. All right. But just listening to your voice, he tells his daughter, I'm coming to get you. And she says, all right, daddy, I can let him take me because I know you're coming. All right.
Wait a minute. My husband said, why don't they just give that man his daughter? Because he doesn't speak the language. He got his passport. I'm getting ready because it's understood
white men are protectors and providers, and he's going to stomp the earth until he finds his daughter and brings her back with her virginity still intact and nothing has happened to her. And that's the reward of white masculinity. Tell me when you've seen a film where this was a black man who did this, and there have been a couple, but not very many. And that's why a film like Django Unchained still means something, even though it was set in an slavery, this is antebellum, but it's like, be real clear. This man said, I'm traveling through seasons and in the most perilous places to go get this woman back and to save her and to keep her from harm before anything truly bad happens. A fate worse than death. These white men get a hold of her. And it's like, we don't have those tropes, but we celebrate them in Black culture. So how do Black men define masculinity? And then when they truly, start to encapsulate it and they're doing it, how does society punish them for it? All right.
Right. And it goes back, like you said, though, like these are white conceptualizations of masculinity. And so how do Black men define masculinity? We need to emancipate it from these white conceptualizations, right? And not apologize the ways that are more culturally specific. And so I think as long as Black men, we're trying to take on someone else's mantle of masculinity, we're always going to be led astray. So Wade Nobles, right, is an Afrocentric psychologist, and he has this concept of conceptual incarceration. He says you can't really think outside of the oppressor's paradigm.
Yes.
And so it's about figuring out, what does an authentic masculinity look like, one that is not grounded in domination, because that's what white masculinity is domination. But instead of calling it white masculinity, we call it masculinity. We place it on this pedestal, but it's not really serving anyone. It's not serving them either.
So exactly. Of course it's not. And the reason why they don't want to allow us in, Black men specifically, is because of exactly why a Black man could not walk through that town, because they're afraid of the strength. They're afraid of the brawn. And then they figured out, oh my gosh, a Negro with a brain. Oh, and then they're afraid of the thought pattern. And what their role then becomes is to emasculate every chance they get, to keep the knee on the neck every moment, so that and never let up.
Well, and this is the thing, don't ever forget that the greatest part of that fear when you're talking white supremacy is that white woman will look at that Black man and say, if I have a choice, I'm going to choose this brother over here. All right. So that's what I'm saying. It's amazing to me when you say white supremacy, I always say, no, that's white insecurity. Because if you're truly superior, you don't have to worry about my little Black butt. All right. Okay. You wouldn't be running down little Black kids if you're truly superior and it's in your genes. You telling me you got Nordic strength, but then baby, let that Nordic strength do what it does. But what a lot of us have forgotten. Those African gene patterns, that DNA is strong. And if we've not been run off at this point, to this point, we're not going to be, so a lot of it is, again, your grandparents and your great grandparents, especially the men, they still survived into their 80s and 90s. Sometimes why? Because they had an internal navigation system that basically said, I'm going to define masculinity for me and mine. All right. Yeah. It means that even if we all broke, we're going to work this together and everyone's going to survive. Everybody's going to have a little bit of something. We're going to get through this. But it was a very specific way of handling things. You knew what masculinity was because he was fixing things. He was making things. He was there. Okay. Yeah. His presence enough defined the space. And so we just have to get back to, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Remember what granddaddy did. Remember what your uncles did. Remember that they were there. Remember, it was in their presence more often than not that you understood what masculinity was.
And I'm so glad that we're here having this talk today, because unless we can really process this and move forward, because Black men are suffering from it a lot, and Black women too. And I think that Black women are suffering from it more in the form of microaggressions, more than physical aggressions. And that is equally damaging. That until we get to the point where we understand what it is and call it the thing, that it will eat us alive from the inside out, which makes us bitter and not better. And that's what we want, is so that we can be ultimately. So don't touch that dial, because we're going to wrap up with a testimony. It's testimony time on Ask the Good Doctor when we come back. Don't go
All
away.
right.
We'll be back after this.